I'm Winnie Parker, 57, a single mother who's worked two jobs most of my life to give my son Douglas everything I never had. This Christmas, after driving 6 hours through snow, I arrived at his suburban Boston home with gifts and homemade pie only to hear words that still echo in my head. "I think you have the wrong house." The confusion in his eyes seemed genuine, as if I were a stranger. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever felt the sting of family rejection. I grew up in a small town in Michigan where life was simple but money was always tight. My parents worked in the local factory and taught me the value of hard work, but they couldn't afford to send me to college. I got married young to Thomas, my high school sweetheart, thinking we would build our dreams together. But when I became pregnant with Douglas at 23, everything changed. By the time he was born, I was 24, and Thomas had already left us for a waitress he met on a business trip. Just like that, I became a single mother with no child support and barely enough skills to land a decent job. I remember holding baby Douglas in my arms, making him a promise I would never break. He would have every opportunity I didn't. That meant working as a receptionist during the day and waiting tables at night. It meant skipping new clothes for myself so he could have proper winter boots. It meant cutting coupons until my fingers were sore and learning to fix the plumbing myself when the pipes froze because I couldn't afford a plumber. Douglas was such a bright child. By third grade, his teachers were telling me he was gifted, especially in mathematics. I would sit with him after my evening shift, barely able to keep my eyes open, helping him with homework I sometimes didn't even understand myself. As he grew older, our bond deepened. We were a team, Douglas and me, against the world. When he was accepted to an elite university in Boston with a full scholarship, I cried for 3 days straight. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride. My boy was going to be the first in our family to attend college. The day I drove him to campus, he hugged me tight and whispered, "Everything I am is because of you, Mom." I thought my heart would burst. Then he met Audrey during his junior year. She came from old New England money with a family estate in Martha's Vineyard and connections to people whose names I only read in magazines. She was beautiful, polished, and painfully aware of social hierarchies. The first time I met her parents, they asked what country club we belonged to. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, only to realize it wasn't. After Douglas and Audrey got married, things changed slowly at first. Phone calls became less frequent. My visits to their Boston home were met with increasingly tight schedules. "Sorry, Mom. We can only do lunch today. We have a fundraiser tonight." Or, "The weekend isn't great, actually. Audrey's parents are coming to take us sailing." Still, I kept supporting them. When they wanted to buy their first house in an exclusive neighborhood, I emptied my modest savings account to help with the down payment. And even though I should have been focusing on my own retirement, I set up an automatic transfer of $800 monthly into Douglas's account. "Just until you get established," I told him. That was 5 years ago, and those transfers had never stopped. Last Christmas had been particularly uncomfortable. Audrey made comments about my quaint, homemade gifts, and Douglas barely spoke to me during dinner, engrossed in conversation with Audrey's father about investment opportunities. I left feeling like an outsider, but convinced myself it was just temporary growing pains in our relationship. This year, I was determined to make things right. I saved for months to buy gifts I thought would impress them. Designer scarves for Audrey, educational toys for the grandchildren, and an expensive watch for Douglas. I spent days baking and cooking, preparing all the dishes he loved as a child. I even bought a new outfit, spending more than I should have, on a dress I thought would fit in with their elegant holiday aesthetic. The morning of Christmas Eve, I packed my car with the gifts, food, and my small overnight bag, hoping they might invite me to stay. The weather forecast warned of snow, but nothing would stop me from seeing my son and grandchildren. As I drove through the intensifying snowstorm, I rehearsed conversations in my head, promising myself I would try harder to connect with Audrey and fit into their world. 6 hours later, exhausted but excited, I pulled into the driveway of their colonial-style home, already feeling like an outsider among the luxury cars and perfectly manicured landscaping, even under a blanket of snow. The house looked like something from a magazine cover. Christmas lights outlined every window and doorway with precision. A professional-looking wreath hung on the door, nothing like the homemade ones Douglas and I used to craft together. Through the large bay windows, I could see a towering Christmas tree adorned with what appeared to be color-coordinated ornaments, nothing out of place. I parked behind a gleaming black BMW I didn't recognize, assuming it belonged to other holiday guests. My arms loaded with carefully wrapped packages and a container of my homemade apple pie, the one Douglas had always said was better than anything in any restaurant. I made my way carefully up the salted walkway. My heart was pounding with anticipation as I rang the doorbell. I heard children's laughter inside and the muffled sounds of Christmas music. After a moment, the heavy door swung open and there stood Douglas, my son. My pride and joy, the child I had sacrificed everything for, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Confusion, annoyance, panic. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice formal and distant. I laughed nervously, thinking he must be joking. "Douglas, it's me. Merry Christmas. I brought gifts and food." I held up the packages, smiling through my confusion. He glanced quickly over his shoulder before turning back to me, his face now controlled and cold. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, packages still held up awkwardly, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of his living room. I saw Audrey in an elegant red dress, her perfectly highlighted hair falling in waves around her shoulders. She was holding their younger child, 4-year-old Emma, while 6-year-old James played with what looked like an expensive remote-controlled car. When Audrey spotted me at the door, her eyes widened momentarily before she quickly ushered the children toward the back of the house, whispering something in James's ear that made him look back at me with curiosity. "Douglas," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "It's me, your mother." He shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding." His tone was firm, as if speaking to a door-to-door salesperson who wouldn't take no for an answer. In that moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a joke. My own son was pretending not to know me, denying my existence at his doorstep on Christmas Eve with his children, my grandchildren, just feet away. A wave of dizziness washed over me. My chest tightened as if someone had placed a heavy weight on it. The packages suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my arms. "I see," I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "I'm sorry to have bothered you." I turned and walked back down the path, careful not to slip on the freshly fallen snow, my legs moving automatically, while my mind remained frozen in disbelief. I placed the packages on the passenger seat of my car and sat behind the wheel, unable to start the engine. From there, I could see into their front window. Douglas had returned to the living room. Audrey was speaking animatedly, gesturing toward the door. Other guests I didn't recognize were gathered around the fireplace with champagne glasses in hand. They looked like a perfect Christmas card family, one that apparently had no room for a working-class mother who didn't fit the image. I sat there for 30 minutes as snowflakes gathered on my windshield, obscuring my view of the life I was not welcome to share. My fingers were numb from the cold, but I couldn't feel them. I couldn't feel anything except a crushing sense of betrayal that made it hard to breathe. My phone rang, startling me out of my daze. The screen showed Douglas's name, and for a brief moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe he would apologize and invite me in, laughing about some ridiculous mix-up. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom." Douglas's voice came through, calm and controlled. There was no emotion, no urgency, certainly no apology. It sounded rehearsed, as if he'd planned what to say. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened at the door. We just weren't expecting you." "Weren't expecting me?" I repeated. "Douglas, it's Christmas Eve. I always come for Christmas." There was a slight pause. "We decided we wanted some peaceful family time this year. Just us. I thought I mentioned that when we spoke last month." He hadn't. Our last conversation had been brief, with him rushing to end the call, but there had been no mention of changing our holiday traditions. "We're having some important business associates over tonight," he continued. "It's not a good time. Maybe we can meet for lunch sometime after the holidays." The casual way he dismissed our Christmas tradition, reducing it to an inconvenient lunch sometime in the future, felt like another slap in the face. "I understand," I said quietly, pride somehow keeping my voice from breaking. I wouldn't want to impose. "Great. I appreciate your understanding. I'll call you after New Year's, okay? Have a good Christmas, Mom." You too, I whispered. Then came the moment that would change everything. Douglas didn't hang up properly. I heard the click of the phone being set down, but the call continued. His voice came through, no longer controlled and measured, but relaxed and dismissive. That's handled, I heard him say, presumably to Audrey. She's leaving. Thank God, came Audrey's voice clearer than I expected. I thought she would make a scene. Your mother always had a flair for the dramatic. She thinks that money she sends every month buys her a seat at the table, Douglas said with a laugh that pierced my heart, as if $800 makes up for how embarrassing she is around my colleagues. I should have hung up. I knew I should have hung up, but I was frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, each word a new wound. Your mother doesn't fit in with the image we're building, Douglas, Audrey said. The way she talks about her waitressing days, her couponing tips, it's not what the children should be exposed to. They need to understand our social position. I know, Douglas agreed. The kids barely know her anyway. James asked if she was our housekeeper last time she visited. Their laughter floated through the phone light and carefree, as if they weren't discussing a person who had given everything for them. As if they weren't discussing me. Did you see what she was wearing? Audrey continued. And that accent when she gets emotional. So, Midwest working class. At least, we don't have to pretend to like her gifts now, Douglas added. Last year's handmade scarf was sitting in our donation pile for months. The handmade scarf I had spent weeks knitting during my lunch breaks, choosing colors I thought Audrey would love. The scarf I had been so proud of. Finally, mercifully, someone else called their names, and I heard footsteps moving away from the phone. With shaking hands, I ended the call. For several minutes, I sat completely still, the silence in my car deafening. Then, mechanically, I started the engine and pulled away from the house, away from my son, away from the life I thought we shared. I drove until I found a budget motel with a vacancy sign. The young man at the reception desk looked at me with concern as I checked in, asking if I was okay. I must have looked shell-shocked. All I could manage was a nod as I took the key to room 118, a place that would witness the most painful Christmas Eve of my life. The motel room was basic but clean, with a bed, a small table, and a television showing Christmas movies I couldn't bear to watch. I placed my overnight bag on the faded bedspread and began unpacking the gifts I had brought with me from the car, arranging them on the table like a pathetic display of rejected love. For Audrey, the designer scarf that cost 2 weeks of my grocery budget. For James, the engineering kit he had mentioned wanting during our brief phone call months ago. For little Emma, the handcrafted dollhouse I'd found at an artisan fair, knowing how she loved tiny things. And for Douglas, the watch I'd saved 6 months to afford, engraved with the words, "Always proud, always your mom." Sitting on the edge of the bed, I was flooded with memories. Douglas, at 7, missing his 2 front teeth, proudly showing me the A on his math test. Douglas, at 12, falling asleep against my shoulder on the bus after working a double shift. Douglas, at 17, holding his scholarship letter, tears in his eyes as he told me, "We did it, Mom. We really did it." I remembered the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because there was only enough food for one and he was a growing boy. The time I'd developed pneumonia but still worked because missing shifts meant missing rent. The winter our heat was turned off and we slept in the same bed with all our clothes on, making up stories about explorers in the Arctic to pretend it was an adventure. I thought about the care packages I'd sent to him at college every week, even when postage strained my budget. Each one contained homemade cookies, notes of encouragement, and usually a small gift like a warm pair of socks or a book from the secondhand store I thought he'd enjoy. He used to call me after receiving each package, his voice warm with gratitude. Then came the memories of helping them buy their first house. They had found the perfect starter home but needed help with the down payment. I'd withdrawn $23,000 from my modest retirement fund, incurring penalties I couldn't afford because Douglas promised it would just be a temporary loan. That loan was never repaid. And then, the monthly transfers, $800 sent faithfully on the first of every month for the past 5 years. Money that came from picking up extra shifts at the reception desk, from cutting back on my own medications, from postponing repairs on my aging car. Money I had convinced myself was an investment in my future, in staying close to my son and grandchildren. Money that, according to Douglas himself, bought me nothing. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation I'd overheard, trying to pinpoint when things had changed so dramatically. Was it when he met Audrey? When he entered her world of privilege and polish, or had the seeds been there all along and I'd been too blind to see them? By dawn, my sadness had crystallized into something else. Not quite anger, but a clear-eyed recognition of a painful truth I had enabled this. My endless giving, my refusal to set boundaries, my desperate desire to be loved and included had allowed my son to take me for granted, to see me as nothing more than a source of financial support and an embarrassment to be hidden away. As the first light of Christmas morning filtered through the thin motel curtains, I reached for my phone. With steady hands, I opened my banking app and navigated to the automatic transfers section. The next payment to Douglas was scheduled for January 1st, just a week away. I clicked Cancel All Future Transfers and confirmed my choice. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying suddenly lifted. Next, I composed an email to Douglas. I heard what you said after you thought you hung up the phone. I won't be sending any more money. I deserve better than to be your secret ATM and family embarrassment. I raised you to be a better man than this. Merry Christmas, Mom. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned off my phone, lay back on the lumpy motel pillow, and finally, mercifully, fell asleep. I woke up late on Christmas Day to the sound of families celebrating in nearby rooms. Children's excited voices carried through the thin walls as they discovered what Santa had brought. Under different circumstances, I would have been watching my grandchildren open the gifts I'd carefully chosen. Instead, I was alone in a strange room with a pile of unwanted presents and a hollow feeling in my chest. After a shower and a cup of mediocre coffee from the motel's lobby, I decided what to do with the gifts. The motel clerk told me about a women's shelter nearby that housed families escaping domestic violence. They probably don't have much for Christmas, she said. I packed everything back in my car and drove there, dropping off all the presents with a volunteer who thanked me with tears in her eyes. These children will have Christmas after all, she said. Walking back to my car, I felt a small spark of warmth in the coldness that had enveloped me since yesterday. The drive home was treacherous. The snowstorm had intensified overnight and visibility was poor. In a way, I welcomed the challenge of the drive. It required all my concentration, leaving no room to dwell on painful thoughts. 6 hours later, I arrived home to my small but cozy house decorated with the same Christmas ornaments Douglas and I had made together over the years. I plugged in the lights, heated up a frozen dinner, and watched It's a Wonderful Life, alone, trying to find meaning in a holiday that felt anything but wonderful. Days passed with no word from Douglas or Audrey. I returned to work after the holiday break, going through the motions while processing my grief. Friends noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you tell people that your only child pretended not to know you, that the son you sacrificed everything for called you an embarrassment when he thought you couldn't hear? A week after New Year's, the first text came from Douglas. Mom, there seems to be a problem with the bank transfer this month. Can you check on it? I didn't respond immediately. 2 days later, another text arrived. Mom, please call me about the transfer. There must be some bank error. Finally, I sent a brief reply. No error. I canceled it permanently. That opened the floodgates. Calls and texts poured in from both Douglas and Audrey. The tone evolved quickly from confusion to panic to anger. You can't just cut us off without warning, Douglas wrote. We've made financial commitments based on that support, came Audrey's message. Then, the guilt trip started. If you cared about your grandchildren, you wouldn't do this. The final message was the most painful. If this is how you want to be, don't expect to see the kids again. Your choice. I almost crumbled then. The thought of losing my grandchildren, of never seeing James's gap-toothed smile or hearing Emma's infectious giggle again was almost too much to bear. My finger hovered over the banking app, ready to reinstate the transfers, just to maintain that connection. That's when my sister Marion called. We weren't particularly close, but she sensed something was wrong from my voice. When I finally broke down and told her everything, she listened without interruption. Then, she said something I'll never forget. Winnie love isn't a one-way street. It's not love if it's only about what you can give them. And those babies will find a way back to you if that relationship was real. Her words strengthened my resolve. I didn't respond to the threats. I didn't reinstate the transfers. I chose, perhaps for the first time in my relationship with my adult son, to value myself. Through mutual friends in Boston, I later learned that Douglas and Audrey were in financial trouble. The house I had helped them buy was mortgaged to the hilt. They had taken out loans to maintain their lavish lifestyle, counting on my monthly contribution as guaranteed income. Within 2 months, they received a foreclosure notice. That's when Douglas called again. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to beg for help. "Mom, we're going to lose everything. The bank is taking the house. We need $50,000 to stop the foreclosure. I know I can count on you." It was the hardest no I ever had to say. His response was a string of accusations I was vindictive, cruel, punishing him for a misunderstanding. I hung up mid-tirade and cried myself to sleep that night, wondering if I had made the right choice. The months that followed were a strange mixture of grief and unexpected growth. With no contact from Douglas or his family, I found myself with something I hadn't had in decades, time and money, that was truly my own. At the suggestion of a coworker, I joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children. The stories I heard there helped me understand I wasn't alone. Parents whose children had cut them off because of new partners, financial disagreements, or simply growing apart into different value systems. Some had reconciled, others had found peace in accepting the separation. All of them understood the unique pain of being rejected by someone you had given your life to nurturing. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during years of working multiple jobs. I took a pottery class I had always been interested in but never had time for. I started taking walks in the local park where I met a group of women my age who gathered there every morning. They invited me to join their book club, and for the first time in years, I had a social circle that was just mine, not connected to Douglas or his family. With the $800 a month I was no longer sending to Douglas, I started planning the trip to Europe I had dreamed about since high school. I opened a special savings account and watched it grow, imagining myself walking the streets of Paris and Rome. Then, 10 months after that fateful Christmas Eve, an email appeared in my inbox from Douglas. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." The message was long and thoughtful. He explained how losing my financial support had started a cascade of consequences. They had indeed lost the house. Audrey, unwilling to downsize her lifestyle, had left him for a wealthier man taking the children with her. He was in a custody battle, living in a small apartment and working longer hours than ever before. But the most important part came near the end. I've had time to think about what really matters. I remember who I was before I got caught up in impressing Audrey and her family. I remember the values you taught me: honesty, hard work, and treating people with dignity. Somewhere along the way, I forgot all that. I forgot who really loved me and who was just using me. Most unforgivably, I forgot how to treat my own mother, the one person who never gave up on me, even when I gave her every reason to. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, and I am truly sorry. I read the email 10 times, my emotions swinging between skepticism and hope. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation? I finally responded with an invitation to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the designer suit and perfectly styled hair. This Douglas looked more like the boy I had raised in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his face showing lines of stress and humility I hadn't seen in years. Our conversation was awkward at first, years of hurt standing between us like an invisible wall. He told me more about his separation from Audrey, his struggle to adjust to a simpler life, and his fight to remain in his children's lives. I listened without offering solutions or support, a new boundary I was determined to maintain. "I don't expect anything from you, Mom," he said finally. "I just want a chance to show you I can be better than I was. I want my kids to know their grandmother, the real you, not the caricature Audrey painted." I agreed to small, careful steps, a lunch here, a phone call there. I met his children again, not as strangers, but as their grandmother who had missed them terribly. 6-year-old Emma remembered me and ran into my arms. 8-year-old James was more reserved, but warmed up when I brought the engineering kit I had originally bought him for Christmas. Douglas and I established new ground rules: no financial support, no pretending the past hadn't happened, regular, respectful communication, and most importantly, honesty about our feelings and expectations. The first dinner I hosted for them in my home was tense but healing. Douglas noticed the photograph albums on my shelf, the ones documenting his childhood that used to embarrass him. He asked if we could look through them with the children. As James and Emma giggled at pictures of their father as a gap-toothed child, something shifted in the room. A connection was being reestablished, fragile but real. 2 years have passed since that Christmas Eve that broke my heart but ultimately healed our relationship. Douglas is a different man now. Therapy has helped him understand how he allowed external validation and materialistic values to override the principles he was raised with. He lives in a modest 3-bedroom home, drives a sensible car, and has found joy in simplicity rather than status. Through court-ordered family counseling, he and Audrey have established a civil co-parenting relationship. The children spend alternating weeks with each parent. In Audrey's home, they have luxury and privilege. In Douglas's home, and when they visit me, they learn about work ethic, compassion, and finding joy in relationships rather than possessions. I've established firm boundaries I never knew I needed. I love my son and grandchildren deeply, but that love no longer comes with blank checks or blind acceptance of disrespectful behavior. I've learned that standing up for myself doesn't mean losing my family, but rather gaining an authentic relationship based on mutual respect. Last Christmas, we gathered at my home. Douglas arrived early to help me decorate the tree with the same homemade ornaments he once found embarrassing. The children presented me with handmade cards, a tradition Douglas had started with them. As we sat around my dining table eating the same simple holiday meal I had made throughout his childhood, Douglas raised his glass in a toast. "To my mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught me what really matters, who loved me enough to let me fall so I could learn to stand on my own 2 feet again. I'm sorry for all the years I took you for granted, for the cruel words you overheard, and for forgetting that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or social connections, but in having people who love you for exactly who you are." I'm not saying forgiveness came easily. There are still moments when the memory of that rejection stings when I recall his callous words about the money, buying a seat at the table. But I've learned that holding on to hurt only prevents healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but choosing to move forward unburdened by resentment. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from this painful journey is understanding that sometimes love means letting go. By canceling those transfers and refusing to continue enabling behavior that was hurting both of us, I actually gave my son the opportunity to rediscover his true self. My worth was never determined by how much I could give or how well I fit into someone else's idea of acceptability. Real family connections can't be bought or sold, only nurtured through respect, honesty, and mutual care. As we move forward, our relationship continues to evolve and strengthen. There are still awkward moments and occasional disagreements, but they're handled with the respect that should always have been there. I've found peace in knowing that the connection we share now is authentic, not based on financial dependence or obligation, but on genuine love and appreciation. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the moment but led to healing in the long run? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of family challenges and reconciliation. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop giving them what they want and start giving them what they truly need. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your own family relationships be built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and authentic love.